to Discograffiti, the deep dive podcast for music obsessives that gives maniacs like you and me the chance to connect with a brotherhood obsessed with rating the entire discography of every single artist and band that ever mattered. I'm your host, Dave Gebroe, and when I was a kid, I thought I loved music. But no, that was only the beginning. I almost lost my life, and in the process, it made music a top priority in a way I'd thought was completely unimaginable. I quit my job, went all in on Discograffiti, and never looked back. And so, with 3 new episodes each week, you're going to gain a comprehensive knowledge of an act's history and output in the time it takes to listen to one album. Each new guest swings a hard left into an area you either had no idea you needed to know about, or know all about and can't believe you're not alone out there. And in this episode, we'll be turning our spray cans on Love! Along with our special guest, Johnny Echols. This episode is part of a series called 7 and 7 and 7 is, the definitive 21-episode story of Arthur Lee and Love, which I've consciously crafted to act as the ultimate repository of fact and opinion on one of the greatest bands to ever walk the face of the earth, the almighty Love. It includes 13 episodes heralding the return of Discograffiti host OG Joe Kennedy, 6 episodes from a 4.5-hour interview with OG Love mainstay Johnny Echols, and 2 episodes from a 2.5-hour interview with the members of Baby Lemonade, who've served as Love now for coming up on 35 years. This is part 6, the third part of my interview with Johnny Echols, which covers the same time period as episode 5, but in more granular detail and heard directly from the man who lived it. Part 6 covers Love's Capo, the machinations behind the scenes, the making of the record, and all the classic music on it. Here are just a few of the many things that Johnny discusses with Discograffiti in this podcast. How Love shifted from being jazz fans to entering into jazz territory as a band. The background of the Sly coda of 7 and 7 is. How the Rolling Stones borrowed from Love at least twice. The kind of imprint Paul Rothchild's production made on their sophomore record. How Johnny counters the myths that proliferate around this band. And an in-depth track-by-track deep dive with Johnny on Capo, plus his own star rating for the record. And away we go then! I've always loved Que Vida.
You know, it was an interesting song, but the thing that was fascinating to me was the flute part. You know, Jay Contrelli just figured that out right there on the spot because they didn't have a flute. And that's the whole story in itself, how we ended up with Jay. Because Jay had played with me, I was with the Chuck Daniels band, and Jay was a member of that group. We were playing at Sea Witch in Hollywood, and Arthur comes by and hears us playing, and he forms a rapport with Jay Contrelli. I didn't even realize Jay was going to be at the studio. We hadn't talked about adding 2 more people. And then all of a sudden there's Jay. And then, of course, we had a good rapport and we got along together. And so what I had intended to play on that album, the stuff that we had rehearsed, just went out the window. And most of that album was conceived in the studio with Paul Rothchild's. He just kind of guided us without us actually knowing or feeling that he's adding his influence. He just was very influential without being, overt about it, just kind of, making suggestions, or he would record something a certain way, play it back, and we'd hear that and say, yeah, let's do that. So he was really, really very good.
When I look at that first side and I think of the growth that happened from the first record, it really is the song The Castle that really blows me away with its complexity. Did you at any point look at The Castle and think, how in the hell did we get from that first album to this in such a short time?
Yes, I have, but it was within a few months. But in the studio recording it again, that song was almost created totally in the studio. And Brian does that finger picking. That's Brian doing that, and he just did a magnificent job on that. And so, like, the end of the song the ending was not that way. We just picked that up on the spur of the moment. We all just, came to the same conclusion that this should sound this way. And Jay and Brian and Snoopy had, for some reason, he was a concert pianist, and he was more of a part of our group as a keyboard player than he ever was as a drummer, because he wasn't a drummer. He was a keyboard player, and he did some really interesting things on the keyboards.
His work on the harpsichord was really fantastic.
Yes, that's made many of the songs that just his harpsichord playing. So yeah, Snoopy should get kudos for, because he was not just the orphan. He did add to the group.
Yeah,
in his own way. Yeah.
Is there any truth to the rumor that apparently Arthur was the one who started about She Comes in Colors being about a woman's menstrual cycle, or is it really entirely about Annette Farrell?
It's about Annette. Because she used to wear these really, really colorful clothes. I didn't even know that he had a relationship with Annette, because she was everyone's friend. I'll put it that way.
Do you think, as Arthur did, that the Stones ripped you off with that one as well as potentially Going Home?
Yes. They, would do that to quite a few young groups. They would come in and hear them play, and they'd pick up ideas. And that's just, back during that time, that was just kind of natural. You'd go in and you'd hear a group playing something, and you'd you wouldn't just rip them off verbatim, but you pick up an idea or so from a particular song. So that wasn't that unusual, but these guys were blatant about it.
So we flipped this thing over, and Arthur has called Revelation, quote, the worst fucking song I've ever done in my life. And obviously, having understood that it's really Paul's editing of the song that really kind of murdered it. Do you agree or disagree? What is your take on Revelation?
Well, I know what Revelation could be and what it has sounded like, and it's really a wonderful song. That night just was a horrible night when we first started to record Revelation. First, Brian and Arthur get in a fist fight out in the parking lot over what, I don't know, but I know Brian comes in and his nose is bleeding, and they had been fighting, and I have no idea what it was. I didn't even bother to ask them what their trip was. So anyway, that started it. And then the guy from the Union comes in and tells us we meant to do Revelation live at studio the way we did it in the clubs. And so there would be an audience there, and they would be dancing, and there would be the noise and the applause and whatever, and the talking in the background. It was meant to be that kind of song. And the guy from the Union said, no, they had to join the Union in order to be even minor parts of it. I don't understand. I don't think he understood the rules, but he was new, and he convinced us that we couldn't do it. So there went that. And so everybody had to leave. Then Arthur decides he wants to play on the song now. When we did the song live, he kind of pretended he was playing. He's holding the guitar, but the song only has 2 chords. And so he's just kind of moving back and forth playing those 2 chords, and he doesn't do anything else throughout that song. But when we get to the studio, he decides he wants to have a more central role. So he wants to begin the song. Now he starts it off too fast. It doesn't have the drive or rhythm. It just it's just kind of meanders from there. But we still played it after a point. We got to, because we did probably about maybe 35, 40 minutes of that song total. And we started to get into the groove once Arthur moved over to harmonica. But it just never really reached the potential that it had. But it was worlds better than it was on the record, because it still was cohesive. There has a beginning, a middle, and the solos, and each one of us would play our solo and walk off the stage and only leave the drummer, and then we would all come back. And that's the way Coltrane did certain songs, and so we were emulating him. And it was pretty good. I would say I'd give it, even though Arthur started it too fast, we were able to bring the tempo down and get a groove going. So I think I'd give it a B+, the way we did it.
I honestly see the disparity between one of the great album sides of all time and Revelation as part of the greatness of the record, because honestly, I have never heard such a great album with such a wildly skewed side A, side B disparity.
Well, that's because, as I said, Paul Rothschild, they had never heard the song before, so he spliced it, and he spliced the harpsichord on it and all of this stuff that never was in this song originally. And my whole guitar part that he just played me playing, I think I'm playing on that, the first part of it, a jazz guitar, an L5, but I had a distorted guitar, a long, really cool Clapton-esque, Jeff Beck-esque kind of solo that's not in the song at all anymore. So we were meandering. What we're starting, basically, the song was supposed to be sort of a mixtape in the song. It went from kind of a bluesy bluesy thing to more of a jazz oriented to more of an avant-garde. It had all of these parts to it. And when you put them together, it's like you get a puzzle and you put it together wrong, and you don't put the pieces, and you just try to hammer them in rather than pieces that naturally fit. You're going to end up with a mess. And that's what we ended up with, a mess.
What are your favorite songs on Da Capo then? And how many stars do you give it overall out of 5?
Okay, let's see.
All right, that concludes your free sneak peek into today's bonus episode. If you want to hear the rest of it, just visit patreon.com/discograffiti and either purchase this podcast by itself for $4, or better yet, subscribe at the major tier and get access to Discograffiti's 3 weekly episodes. That's Friday's main episode, the Sunday Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast. That's our podcast within a podcast featuring Patreon members as guests, and your Tuesday bonus episode. Please keep in mind this is entirely how I support my wife and 7-year-old son, so don't risk feeling badly about yourself by not supporting Discograffiti. Become a member so you don't miss a single thing at patreon.com/discograffiti.